Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. We're going to start the webinar in just a couple of minutes to let in as many people as possible. So just sit tight. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey guys, thank you all for tuning into our webinar, How to Achieve a 30% Reply Rate on Cold Emails. The number of people that
We've lost you, Angela, I think. Just bear with us for a minute, guys.
And we've been testing for that for the whole time.
Say hi in the chat whilst you're waiting, guys, or maybe throw some questions in there. We'll get the chance to answer a bunch as we run through.
True, John. It's just having a day.
She'll be back in just a moment, I'm sure. Maybe throw in the chat area what company you're from, what you're interested in today. That'll all be
Yeah,
super
you lost internet connection. No.
Hey, Anne.
You want us to just go ahead and do introductions? All right. Well, I was just chatting with Angela. I think she lost her internet connection at the most inopportune time. So why don't we go ahead with introductions? So, hey, I'm Tim. I'm the head of product at Hull. I work with Angela. So Hull exists because a lot of the information that you need is not in the tools that you want to use. And so what we are is we're a customer data platform that enables you to unify all of your data, online and offline sources. You normalize and cleanse it, and then fan it back out into the system so everything's in sync and you have the data that you need where you need it.
That's cool. I'll go next, maybe Tim. So hey everyone. First of all, thanks to Hull for inviting me along to the webinar. It's really cool to be here. I'm Harrison, co-founder at Paddle. Super briefly on Paddle in terms of who we are and what we do. Paddle is a SaaS commerce platform. So we handle checkout, payments, invoicing, tax billing, and more, all for software companies. And we do this so they can focus on growing their business without getting held back by kind of tooling and infrastructure.
Cool. I'll go next. So, hi, my name is Alex. I used to run commercial operations at Paddle. Well, one of the biggest projects that I've undertook was building out commercial data engine that I think we'll be talking about at great depth today. I have since left Paddle and found a good fit, which helps other companies build their own commercial engines to drive their go-to-market efforts. Thank you for having me here.
All right. My name is Brooke Bachesta. Super excited to be here as well. I'm a senior manager of sales development at Outreach.io. And what we do is we help salespeople sell more and sell faster. So kind of automating all the mundane tasks that we all have to do as sales reps. So you can spend more time selling.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll have the slides up and working in just a minute. It seems like that Hull hit a technical issue, but we're right with you. It seems like we've got people tuning in from all over the place. So we've got Oakland, Boston, London. Very cool. Thanks for the patience, guys. And Anthony sending good vibes to Angela's internet connection to get these slides shared.
Yeah. Why don't I think Angela said I could pull up the slides
Yep.
right now, and I can share them.
Cool.
Give me 1 second. All right. So Angela and I were actually in a real live kind of conference once that she organized, and the guy who was speaking, his mic wasn't turned on, and nobody knew what was wrong until I had to run up on stage and turn on his mic.
Oh, no.
All right, here we go. All right, can you guys see the slides?
Not yet. I think we're looking at another screen, perhaps. Yeah. I'm seeing quite far into the deck there, Tim, as opposed to the start.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we get started?
Yeah, so I could give some background maybe on what we're going to cover, Tim. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
So today we're going to be basically sharing the step-by-step on kind of how you improve your response rates on email. We're going to be sharing the paddle story and hoping some of you can apply that to your own businesses too. I do think kind of this early stage as well, it's probably worth acknowledging that a lot of what we're going to be talking about has huge benefits to your business, but your commercial activity as a whole. We're going to be talking a lot about commercial data, and it's this data which is really going to drive that improved performance in your email and your email sequences. But candidly, it's that same data through which we run our entire commercial operation and commercial functions at Paddle. And I often cite it's our kind of usage of commercial data, which has been the kind of secret sauce behind our growth over the past 8 years or so. And both Hull and Outreach have a huge part to play in this. I'm going to talk about how you can utilize those two different tools throughout the webinar today. So kind of without further ado, we're going to run you guys through how we gathered kind of our initial set of commercial data at Paddle, which drives this performance. And this is also where Tim will talk to you about how Hull can help you manage and kind of transform that data. Next, we'll talk about how you use or how you activate the data in something like Outreach in your email sequences. I'm going to look at a bunch of examples there and different sequences you could put together. We're even going to look at an example email that we've been sending out at Paddle, which has yielded some of these fantastic kind of best-in-class results. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how you then measure and iterate upon your performance. Really hoping everyone listening today can kind of take something away for their own business, and we'll go from there. If you could set me up with the next one, Tim. Cool. So phase one is really about kind of gathering the data and what we call kind of mapping the market. This is the first step in building really effective email messaging. And basically, there's no secret here. Like the first step in sending out great email that's going to get replied to is delivering it to the best possible fit companies and accounts that you can. And to tell a little bit of a story, I guess when we started Paddle 8 years ago, and I was our only sales rep, nobody knew who we were. Nobody knew what we were doing. I don't think people even understood the business model in which we operated in. There was no inbound interest for us whatsoever. So really quickly, we had to build a list of customers we could both sell and market to. So we started by mapping the market of every single company we could sell to. Now for Paddle, and this will be different for each of you, This was gathering a database of as many software companies as we possibly could. Today, we have over 200,000 domains in this database. The more the better, and it's constantly being updated. And I think what Alex is going to do is he'll discuss with you guys how we went about mapping that market and gathering all of these lists of kind of accounts and companies we could sell to. And he'll also give you some examples as to how you might do that in your own business. And then following that, we'll talk about how to enrich these accounts with additional data attributes and talk about the reasons why this is so important in terms of hitting those best-in-class performance results, which is why you're all here. And last but not least, we'll also talk about how Hull is really critical as a part of this process in actually managing and transforming the data. But Alex, I'll let you take it away on the next slide to talk about how we actually went about doing this.
Cool. Thank you, Harrison, for setting up the scene. So just to kind of start more broadly, I think the most overlooked element of achieving high engagement rates is really who you're sending those sequences to. And it might sound obvious, but having a list of highly qualified prospects that have an actual need for your product will result not only in higher response rates, but also higher opportunity creation rates and higher win rates later down the line. And that obviously translates into less effort and resources needed from your sales team to hit their targets. So when approaching the task of getting the list of their prospects, most companies usually exclusively rely on industry and revenue data points. And to be quite honest, this is only half the job. The goal when mapping the market is to identify the prospects that have an actual need for your product and prioritize them based on the propensity to buy they have and expected ACV. So how do you go about finding the companies that have an actual need for your product? Unfortunately, there is no fast rule here, as each company will have a different ICP. And what that means is that the data points that you require will be bespoke, and very often you will need to use multiple different data providers or even source the data yourself. So just to give you a couple of examples. So Paddle's kind of market is software companies. And when we are going about our task of sourcing our target market, one thing that we had to bear in mind is that right now we primarily focusing on companies that let customers buy their product via checkout on their website. And that means we have to filter out all the software companies that don't have a checkout on their website, the companies that require you to speak to their sales team first before you can access or buy their product. And to do that, we had to do two things. First, we started sourcing technographic data on our prospects and checking if they're using any of the known checkout platforms. And if they were, we could safely assume that they are a good fit for us. And recently, we've gotten a bit more sophisticated and started actually scraping prospects' website directly and trying to determine whether they have a pricing page and an option to purchase directly on their website, or kind of conversely, whether the only way to buy is by requesting a demo or speaking to a rep. So what we're essentially doing here with all that scraping is looking for keywords that will indicate which bucket they fall in. Are they, self-serve, they're selling via a checkout company, or are they sales assisted and you have to request a demo to buy their product? And that would determine our total addressable market. Just to share another example, I've been working with a company that helps businesses analyze their feedback, which means that the total addressable market only includes companies that receive enough feedback, and that's feedback in high thousands every month. And if they don't receive that amount of feedback, they simply don't have a need for their product and they shouldn't be included in their total addressable market. And the way we went about identifying those companies is through sourcing the number of reviews from places like Trustpilot and App Store and Google Play Store, and using it as a qualification criteria, as a proxy to identify a company that is very likely to have a high number of feedback received every single month, and therefore being good fit for them, part of their total addressable market. So to summarize, if you, Tim, could go back to the previous slide for just a second. The first and one of the most important steps to increase your engagement rates is to have highly refined audience of good fit prospects, and the prospects that are not purely sourced based on the revenues or industry, but the prospects that have an actual need for your product. Cool. We can go onto enrichment. So from that point, any data point you further collect on each company is meant to assist you with two things: prioritization and or hyper-relevancy. So let's quickly define what prioritization and hyper-relevancy mean in this context before we jump into some examples. So when we talk about prioritization, what we mean is essentially an ordered list of accounts and prospects. So imagine your reps going into CRM and opening a list of accounts. The account at the top of that list is the one they should engage with first, and the one at the bottom last. That's simple, right? So as with any prioritization, what we're really doing here is looking for this sweet spot between lowest effort and highest reward. And to translate it into sales terms, we're looking for prospects that have the highest propensity buy, so the highest win rate, and the prospect that at the same time have the highest ACV. Now, to describe hyper-relevancy or hyper-relevant messaging. So hyper-relevant messaging, on the other hand, as mentioned before, is messaging that addresses the pains and the needs of the prospects. And this is what we've been using to generate this really high response rates and engagement rates. So to achieve both with data, you usually have to go, again, quite custom. Data points available from most data providers are probably too generic for you. So very often you need to use multiple providers and probably go and source some of the data yourself. And just to illustrate these concepts with an example. So at Paddle, one of our segments is companies located in the US that are selling internationally. And the Paddle use case for them is quite simple. We basically enable them to sell globally in multiple currencies and to be compliant across the globe. And when we were tackling the prioritization part, as in like which prospects, which accounts we should be targeting first, what we did is we started looking at the number of visitors that we're getting from the US and from the other countries, and we're using Alexa rank for that, and trying to identify the companies that had the most traffic outside of the US, so the highest proportion of traffic outside of that. And essentially, we had this list of, you know, going back to the previous example in the CRM, the top account on the list had the most traffic outside of North America, whereas the ones that were selling directly into North America were at the bottom. And then just to give you an example on the hyper relevancy in the same segment. So again, what we enable those companies to do is to sell in multiple currencies. So it was quite obvious to us that the messaging we're going to be sending is around what currencies they should be using based on where they're getting their traffic from. So first of all, we're trying to identify the top countries that we're getting the traffic from, as well as the currencies that we're currently supporting, to be able to give them this best recommendation, as in like they should be looking, for example, for euro and British pound if they're only supporting USD right now. And this is where the hyper relevancy comes into play. So kind of going back into how you can go about enriching your accounts to enable prioritization and hyper relevancy, the good exercise is to think about what you would love to know about your prospects in the ideal world. And very often, this is something you can ask your reps. You can look at the discovery calls they're having with your prospects, because very often they ask prospects those questions. And this is where you can get really creative. There's some basics examples here. I'm sure many of you used that before, but you can use technographic data to, for example, identify prospects using one of your competitors and message them about specific pains they're experiencing by using their current solution and how your platform is better. A bit more sophisticated examples I've seen were companies using content of the reviews to highlight that a company might be getting bad feedback in the area that their platform can help with. So imagine you have a platform that helps e-commerce companies with shipping, with delivery. And for example, you're trying to identify any negative feedback that they received that had content around delivery. Let's say the delivery was delayed, and you could message those prospects referencing this feedback. And this is really hyper relevant because it's really addressing the problems they're having. So just to summarize, there's no golden data point here. They can be using when trying to either prioritize your prospects or drive hyper-relevant messaging. Each company will have different points that are specific to their product. However, start by thinking about what you would love to know about your prospects and think whether there are any data points that would indicate that this is true and that are publicly available.
So this is kind of where Hull steps in. You have all of these data points. Some of them are real time. Some of them are manually entered by your salespeople into a CRM. Some of them are automatically generated, like tracking people's page views on your website. So Hull enables you to take in all of this data and unify it into a single customer profile. And so once you have that single customer profile, you have pretty much all the ways that the customer is interacting with you and your brand, as well as all of this additional data that you've kind of gathered from around the web. So in its raw form, it can be a little bit dirty, and you might need to cleanse it and normalize it. So Hull provides a couple different ways that you can do that. In particular, with cases like Paddle, I think they went to normalize and transform their data at a really fine-grained level, using the Hull processor. And so what the Hull processor is able to do is certainly cleanse and transform your data. But I think more so what you're able to do is you're able to kind of create these second level attributes and categories that enable you to build some really rich segmentation and turn that raw data into real usable information. And we see our customers using a lot of different ways to transform their data, lots of ways which I'm amazed at the creativity every day. I mean, certainly there's a level of lead scoring and things like that to prioritize and get things to the right person at the right time. But we'll talk about some of the other ways that that data can be used as well. Alexander, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that this is definitely really difficult task to do. As Tim mentioned, a lot of data that you will be getting will be raw and unstructured, and you need a platform in the middle between your data sources and your CRM or marketing automation platform to collect all this data into one place and transform it so it's essentially usable. And we've been relying heavily on Hull and its process functionality to make our data actionable and clean.
Great. So once you have that data in an actionable and clean kind of format, what Hull gives you is the ability to, step one is to actually explore that data, to actually go through all of the behavioral, the attribute data, and to begin to understand how people are interacting with you a little bit better. So you've certainly got data that has to do with the account and the company that the people are related to, all the technographic data about the company. You can have personal data as well, like job title. But then all of the behavioral and interactive data is where it really gets interesting, because you can do things like, well, what pages are they viewing on my website? Have they opened any emails that I've sent to recently? And so what the whole segmentation builder is built on Elasticsearch, which is basically a really smart kind of warehouse. And what Hull gives you is a UI where you can use all of the really powerful capabilities of Elasticsearch, like partial text queries, queries based on the behavior and the context. And we give you kind of a really rich experience in order to do these, fairly technical things. I think one of the really interesting things, as part of the second step of using the segmentation builder is, certainly analysis and exploration is something that you can use it for. But the second you've kind of identified an interesting point in the customer journey, you want to be able to activate that data. You want to be able to act on that specific point. And I think that's where the Hull and the segmentation builder really shine, because not only can you build these segments and find these really interesting insights, you can then actually tell it, okay, whenever this happens, I want to put it into an email drip, or I want to send it to one of my SDRs to call them right after this happens. And so I think it's really about, one, exploring the data, and two, activating it in real time. And the segmentation builder kind of puts you in the driver's seat for all of your data to be able to push and pull your data where you need it, when you need it. And I think Alexander will talk a little bit more about how they use the segmentation builder, to create really, really targeted messages at specific people at specific times.
Yeah. So the microsegmentation. So I can't stress enough how microsegmentation, how important microsegmentation is. So basically the idea is you group the prospects by the messaging that is best for them. So you identify the properties on those prospects, the data properties on them, and put them in those microsegments, which essentially labels them with the messaging they should be sent to. And by doing so, you're removing the need from the reps to analyze all the different data points that you collected while mapping your market and enriching your accounts. And they can just kind of understand this is what I should be talking about rather than analyzing all the data. And the second piece, and this is where Hull really comes into play as well, it's really important that those segments are dynamic. So whenever there's any change or update to the data you're collecting, an account should always be in the right segment. And that way you can ensure that your prospects don't receive the messaging that is no longer relevant, and you're not triggering any of the automations and so on when they shouldn't be triggered.
Yeah, perhaps I could do a bit of a recap. So hopefully this gives you an idea of kind of how we initially approached this perhaps. So having kind of mapped your market and found all the different companies you could sell to in your particular segment, you need to start gathering additional data against each of them. And that data should be allowing you to do one of two things: either prioritizing that list of accounts or contacts you want to speak to, or also helping you achieve kind of hyper relevancy in your messaging towards them. You don't want your reps spending a bunch of their time finding accounts or leads in the first place. You don't want your reps to spend a bunch of time actually contacting ones who have no need for your product. Instead, we want to be contacting the best fit folks we possibly can about things that are actually happening in their business. Deliver a message to an account which is publicly showing signals they have a need for your product today. So to pick on a couple of Alex's examples, he said that he's working with a company, or use the example of somebody who works in e-commerce and how they help people around the experience of shipping products. Don't just contact people who ship products, the people who ship products and they're doing it poorly, because you're going to get much higher response rate in selling to the person who has a need for your product right now. In nailing the list of people you're actually targeting and then delivering them a hyper relevant message, you're going to get really, really powerful results. And I think we're going to see some examples of some actual emails in action, which include kind of some data points to achieve hyper relevancy in just a few minutes. But I think we could probably do a couple of questions before we dive onto the next section.
Yeah, we've got a question. We got a question from Ian. He says, what are your thoughts on using data from ZoomInfo intent as an attempt to refine account prioritization and propensity to buy?
You take it,
Alex, take it, right? Yeah. So yeah, 100%. So ZoomInfo intent, Bumbura, definitely great sources to try to identify accounts that are somehow indicating that they have a need for your product. What we found extremely extremely powerful are paddle when it comes to identifying the companies that are in the market right now. Is we listen to the changes to all the data that we collect, and some of those changes are indicating that someone might be in the market for paddle right now. So kind of building on the previous example that I talked about, where we're trying to identify the companies that have a really high percent of the traffic outside of Northern America, which means they're international. Even better feed lead or higher priority lead for us is a company who just recently started receiving a lot of traffic outside of North America. So definitely the intent kind of data is great. Listening to the changes, we found working even better for us.
And that's why the dynamic segmentation that Tim was talking about is also really important. So another example that Alex gave was the company that analyzes feedback for people. if that company was tracking a bunch of data, not only on how much feedback that company was getting, but also maybe the sentiment in that feedback. If you see the amount of feedback they're getting increasing exponentially over time, and a bunch of that feedback seems to be bad or whatever, even just the fact that it's increasing could be a sign to that company that they're going to need a tool in order to analyze this. So tracking changes in the data are super powerful and are a bit of an alert to a rep to actually contact a prospect. It's really well documented that on things like form submissions in responding to, or like demo requests, in responding to those really quickly, you have a much higher chance of actually engaging with the account. I guess there's some similar concepts here that if you contact an account at the time that their data is actually changing or they're making a change within their business, and you've seen that through the change in the data, again, your response rate is going to increase there, or your likelihood of being able to engage with the prospect is also going to increase. Cool. So I think you're going to kick off on phase 2, right, Brooke? We're basically going to talk about how we use data in emails and sequences next.
Yeah, exactly. So you got your subset of like the accounts that you want to focus on, but now it comes time to prioritize how am I actually going to do so. If you jump to the next slide. So we run account-based prospecting at Outreach. And why that's important is, our intent is to surround the entire account rather than just working off of leads or contacts. So I'm going to go through 4 different types of sequences that we found are really helpful in prioritizing your time, and just trying to get a better feel for like, where am I going to work on booking meetings with highly targeted research, as opposed to just I need the quantity and reach into these accounts. So the next slide. So the first of the 4 types of sequences, or outbound messaging, for those who aren't familiar with sequences, I realize I should explain that. That's the term that Outreach uses, which is just replicating the way that humans try and get in touch with each other. So a combination of multi-channel approach of calls, emails, LinkedIn messages, sometimes text or direct mail, just a way of getting in touch with people, a lot of which can be automated. So even in today, where I think the market is demanding a high level of research, and I think we all as consumers expect that if we're being sold to, people have a high level of data around us, because there's so much information available online. You may be asking, like, why would I ever want to use an automated sequence if when I get them on my phone, they seem like they're from a robot and I delete them? There are a couple use cases. Let's say, like I know Bill had asked about like finding accounts that you're not quite sure they're in your ICP and like they may be on your target for a couple quarters out. Intel gathering is a great way to leverage automated sequences. So as an example, let's say that I know that my reps are focusing on calling a specific subset of accounts that we know are in our ICP. We have customers that look just like them. And there's a lot of indicators that they're going to be a really good use case. That might be like an A tier account. There might also be, let's say, a C or a D tiered account where like I just don't have a lot of information. There's not a lot of photos of people on LinkedIn. I can't really tell when the last time is they updated their webpage. But based on some data providers, like I think there's a use case here. Rather than spend the time to write an amazing email that's award-winning that I can post on LinkedIn, I can just send an automated email sequence that's based on messaging that we know personas in that industry typically care about. So you're still using some data to inform your decision making, but it's pre-written, and Outreach is going to help you send it out multiple times with a couple bumps. Now, once you send those, if somebody opens them, now my reps can know, hey, there's a pulse on the other side of this. Like there is somebody opening these. I'm going to end this automated robot sequence and now take the time to write something much more custom. So it's fantastic for that. On the other hand, let's say you have an account that's really large and you're just trying to figure out like who is in charge of these initiatives. You could reach out to individual contributors or like non-decision maker folks who you think are the end users of your product or your solution and say, hey, rep to rep, I'm trying to get in touch with somebody who leads these programs. Could you point me in the right direction? Super low risk, very little energy used to do so. But best case scenario, they point you in the direction of somebody and it takes you all of 30 seconds to add them into sequence. So there is still a use case for automated, even in highly researched day and age. Next slide. Second one here is call heavy. So let's say you've identified folks that you want to get in touch with, and you know that your rep has a really good call conversion rate. Good for us is something around 15% plus. So of all the people that I connect with, I know that 15% of the time I'm going to book them on a meeting. You might use this type of outreach, which is super heavy on phone call. So multi-channel, but still half of the sequence is relying on your rep actually picking up the phone and dialing. It's great for target accounts, and I've included in here the rule set for those who are not outreach customers. There's a lot of automated rule sets that exist in the platform just to save you from yourself. So one of them is you can typically only sequence one person, like you can only use one sequence per person at a time, which makes sense because if I'm trying to get in touch with Tim, but I have him in 15 different messaging touch points, like I look really silly and he assumes that I have no idea what I'm doing and he's going to ignore every email I send him. So that already exists. However, in a call sequence, like if you're only making dials, maybe Tim is somebody that you want to send super targeted messaging to and make extra calls that might not already be within that sequence. So in that instance, you might double sequence a top prospect, which is why we tend to use it a lot for target accounts. And then next up, we'll talk about, there's two different types of research. Again, all about prioritizing your time. So the first type of personalization, we just call a manual sequence. If any of you follow Sam Nelson from Outreach, he has blue hair on LinkedIn, but he came up with this methodology called the Agoji sequence. All it is a custom-ish email as your first impression that's bumped multiple times, and then it's filled with calls and LinkedIn messages all throughout the course of a 2-week touchpoint model. And the reason it's so scalable is because that first email is treated like a Mad Lib. So I call this like JV prospecting. So for all of my reps who are brand new to the industry or fresh out of school and have never been in sales before, it can be really intimidating to research and find something relevant to send your prospect when you have all these data sources. And trying to synthesize that in a reasonable amount of time, like not 2 hours of your life writing what you think is going to be the world's perfect email that may or may not get read. This just helps them to streamline that. So treated like Mad Libs, it'll say like hello, and then name is in brackets so that Outreach can autofill the name of the prospect. It'll say, I saw on your LinkedIn that, and then it'll put brackets to say like include your research here, or perhaps you can use custom fields, like I think Alex is going to talk about later, that can fill in research that you've already done. The pitch about Outreach will be pre-canned, pre-written, specific to that industry and persona, as well as the ask at the bottom. So that call to action of, are you available 2 weekdays from now? So Friday or Monday of next week. Would love to get on the phone with you. That's all written. So the structure is there, the formatting is clean, and all the rep has to do is fill in the research, which is something that you can be a huge time suck for new reps. Now, let's say you're much more senior, and Angela, I think this is my last slide coming up next. In this case, you might use a highly personalized email or a sequence, in which case the first email is totally blank. We would ask reps to leverage things like self-authored content, LinkedIn profile, self-descriptions, personal relationships, where you're like, I have so much intel on this prospect that I can't use a template because it's going to take me more time to shoehorn the template into what I want it to say than it would be for me to just write this email. And so this obviously takes a much more time, looking at like 20 to 30 minutes per email. So we would recommend that our reps could do this on their really high priority target accounts, especially the more senior reps, and then supplement their other, A and B style accounts with those manual level sequences. And there's all kinds of ways to be really speedy about it. And I think next up, Alex can dig a little bit more into that.
I'll kick off on maybe this email example for now, and Alex would talk about how we kind of got to this stage. I think loads of the points there are really interesting. I think reflecting on our experience at Paddle, we take some quite extreme or maybe polarizing views on some of this stuff in terms of, for our BDRs, what we noticed was when we put the onus on them to do a bunch of either account research, they would always struggle to work out how much time should I even invest doing this, and like what is the right amount of time to yield an improved response rate, like should I even do it? And often they'd end up just not doing the research at all, and they kill a bunch of hours there, which was a risk of ours you should all think about. And then another risk that we had is we tried to supply the BDRs or the SDRs with a ton of data so they could use that in order to fill in some of those gaps in the template or the sequence that Brooke was just talking about. They'd often be a bit overwhelmed. Like we'd gather so much data on every single account that the BDRs or the SDRs didn't even know what to put in there or where to even start, because they were just overwhelmed, which is completely understandable. And this is where the likes of Harlan Outreach start to get really powerful. In order to get to this state, and what you're seeing in front of you is an example email that we send out, but a huge amount of stuff has happened before we reach this point. So before we even reach this point in terms of hitting enroll in that sequence or sending that first email, Alex and his team have obviously gathered all of the data on the software company. We've got all that stuff in whole. We may even put a property in whole which says that this is a company we think we should talk to about internationalization, to even suggest to the rep that they should be sending an email around currencies or around internationalization. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do even before this email stage to try and make that rep's life easier. Because what we want to do, to some of Alex's points, is I don't want our reps to spend time trying to find accounts or leads they should be selling to, or even have to spend a ton of time researching them. I kind of want them to be picking accounts off a list with even a suggestion as to what they should be talking to people about, maybe even a message that's kind of pre-computed for them. And what you're seeing in front of you is an example kind of first touch email that we might send out to a prospect. It's kind of a flavor of some of the personalization that Brooke was talking about there. But basically, we're trying to use all the data we've gathered on them in order to deliver a really hyper-relevant message. So in this exact example that you can see in front of you, we're contacting a software company. They have a high percentage of traffic outside of North America, which is great for Paddle because we help them sell internationally. We asked them whether they've considered supporting currencies directly related to the highest traffic regions outside of the ones that they support right now. And we asked them whether they want to support some currencies that they don't today. We even predict the dollar impact supporting those additional currencies would have for them based on their size and traffic, etc. It's a really great example of how you can apply this data that we've gathered to deliver a hyper-relevant message, basically. The person you're contacting will be on the other end of this message, and they'll have thought that you've done hours of research into their customer demographic, which currencies they support, the size of their business, and you've contacted them at a really great time because this is surely something front of mind based on all of this traffic they're getting outside of North America. But in reality, we can compute a message like this without having done any research at all, using all the data that we gathered as a part of what Alex was talking about earlier. And I think he could probably explain as to how we actually start to use some of these custom fields within Outreach in order to deliver messages like this.
Yeah. So just kind of disclaimer, computing this kind of message is unfortunately no piece of cake. And I just want to kind of give you a flavor of how to even approach it. So yeah, this is where tools like Whole Processor that Tim introduced just a second ago become almost necessary. So here we have 3 data points that we had to compute in order to create this message. So first of all, we have the percentage traffic outside of North America. So what we're actually going to be doing here is we're going to look at the total count of visitors globally, and we're going to take a sum of the visitors directly from US and Canada, subtract that from the total count and divide it to arrive at this number. Just a little bit of maths just to arrive at this data point, because no one is supplying this data point right now. So we had to compute this data point ourselves. The next one is top currencies. And I believe this is really at the heart of the hyper relevancy. This is where it looks like we've done research, we spend time, whereas in fact we just computing this message. So what we're doing here is we identifying top 3 or top 5 countries where the traffic is coming from. So where the most traffic is coming from, and then we converting those countries into currencies. Now, if we were just stopping at that, what will happen is we will be sending out a message, just telling them to that they should try the currencies that they might be already using. So the next step that we had to do is essentially look at the website directly and try to determine whether they're using any of those currencies and take them out. So we're looking at 2 data points here: what traffic they're getting, what countries they're getting the traffic from, as well as what currencies they're using currently. So we don't go in and propose them with currencies that they're already using.
Or maybe just to add to that, Alex, like people might think hyper-relevancy is emailing an account telling them they should support a bunch of currencies based on their traffic, but that's not hyper-relevancy. Hyper-relevancy is doing that, but then only listing the currencies which we know that they don't support today, because we've all received an email about something that we should be doing, but maybe we already do it, or maybe we've already got a competitor that's doing that thing for us or whatever. So this is how you're using data points not only to work out who's the best fit for you right now, but also deliver the hyper-relevancy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, this is the really cool part for me. Well, my life is in data and I love data and I think it's really cool. But this is where the data and all that work that you put in where it gets used. And I don't get to do this very often, but when I see it, I think it's awesome. So there's all kinds of things, obviously, that you're calculating and transforming to get to this point. We've seen people talk about, doing dynamic images even. And I think one of the interesting things here that I think about a lot is where you're putting a call to action in, like this link, and you're doing all this work to get this really good email. One of the things that we're able to do that's pretty cool is when you click that link, not only can you track the people that click that link and the email that you're able to open, but when you go to the landing page, you're actually able to tie all of his page visits from previous visits to his profile, to this email. And now that single customer profile kind of gets enriched with everything that he was doing when he was an anonymous user. And you get to get even more hyper personalized the second you've tied that all together.
Makes sense. Do you want to do a recap of any of your stuff there, Brooke? Just muted.
I know how to work a webinar. Okay, so we talked about writing emails and actually building the sequence of like how to prioritize your time so that you can, use data to scale out your personalization. And then, leverage automation as well. Does anybody have any questions around those?
Just whilst they're coming in, there was a bunch of different types of sequences you can consider there. I think a point that perhaps I could also add is that you need to pick the sequence type that's kind of right for your business. But more importantly, your customer is going to respond to you best. Like in our really early days at Paddle, we would do email only sequences because none of the companies we were selling were big enough to even have company phone numbers or whatever that may be. So do think about what touch points are going to make most sense for you. But again, the real secret sauce behind driving this really high response rate that you've seen at the title of the webinar, in my view, is getting that messaging right. And you do that through hyper relevancy and targeting the right accounts in the first place. And you're using your data in order to actually achieve those two outcomes.
Yeah.
Great call out.
So we've got one question, but I think in the interest of time, we still have one more phase to go through. So I would like to save that for the very end if we can get to it.
Cool.
That's cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Now it comes time to, you got your data, you're starting to send stuff out. Now we got to measure, is it working or not? So I can speak to at least the parts in outreach. Number one is just make sure that, are we doing the right types of activities? As a sales leader, it's on me to make sure that bare minimum, my team is giving it a good effort, that they're just trying to get in touch with prospects. And the way that I can measure that is this screenshot is just, it's a grab from our homepage of the reporting area of outreach. And what I'm looking at is number of prospects added. You can change the date fields to whatever you want, but number of prospects added every day. So I ask my team to do a minimum of 15 sequences or add 15 prospects to a sequence every day. Which if you're thinking about it, using those custom fields or writing an email, and if your sequence starts with an email, it's essentially writing 15 custom emails a day in addition to managing their workload. So some folks here with 25 are blowing it out of the park. The other folks with 0 still got some work to do. But the reason this is important to have that consistency is, a sequence is just meant to replicate the way that we want to get in touch with people. And so while some of it is automated, there are points in there which rely on you as the executor of that activity to move it forward. So it happens all the time where a new rep will start, be super excited about getting people into their pipeline. They'll say, boss, I spent Sunday evening and I spent I put 100 people into sequence. Isn't this awesome? I'm going to have like the world's best pipeline at the end of this month. And while I applaud their effort, the truth is there's no way that if there are human interaction points in those sequences that rep who's brand new is going to be able to keep up to date with all of those tasks. So now your data is all skewed around number of people added to sequence because it's not really getting sent out, and you have become the roadblock in your touch point model to your prospect. So super important to whatever the right number is for your business. For some folks, it's 5 a day. For others, it's 40. That you just make sure your reps are executing that at a consistent clip. And then I think the next slide talks about like how to dig in a little bit deeper to that. Yeah, so number one, like, are we doing the right things from a tactical standpoint? Like, are you adding people to your pipeline? Number two is checking, are you actually sending the right types of sequences out? Now, at Outreach, we have a naming convention with those 4 types of sequences: automated, manual, call heavy, personalized, and then a further naming convention. I lead our corporate or mid-market segment, so that's why you see that word listed in front. But things that I would be looking for, like if you have all of this data that can inform your prospecting, so that automation is really just for until it's not used as your attempts to book meetings with people, I should see that like the majority of your deliveries are using the types of sequences that are in our playbook. So if you look at, it says more reports in purple. Underneath that is the date range that I'm looking at. I want to see the last month. Down below, it says the types of sequences that are sent out, stack ranked in order of most deliveries to fewest deliveries for that specific rep. So this rep actually looks pretty good, where they're leveraging manual, right, which is that Mad Lib, like I'm using custom fields and variables to help inform my decision making. That's fantastic. Number 2 is they're using automated referral requests to route around the account, gather intel. And then the third one is the same idea, Mad Lib, but for a different persona. And if I go through all these lists, like those point to me that at least their strategy, they're combining high level of effort with the appropriate strategy that should net out additional meetings. A red flag would be like if it's completely automated and manual doesn't show up until 6th or 7th on their list.
Cool. Thanks, Brooke. I wanted to talk about a bit more around the kind of analytics and kind of how to analyze your performance and iterate on it. And to Brooke's point, it's really, really important that the sequences are used in the first place, because you need to get that volume to get to some form of statistical significance. And I also want to talk about the response rates. So being able to quickly analyze the performance of the campaign or the sequence you're using by response rate is extremely important. It's one of the best leading indicators there are. However, you need to be conscious that your response rates, unfortunately, are not your revenue drivers. And in order to truly determine the performance of your sequences and segments, you need to look beyond just response rates and also look at the conversion rates further down the funnel, including the opportunity creation rates and opportunity win rates. And this is where Hull's ability not to only unify all your data and compute those properties, but also sync it all to your data warehouse has been a game changer for us at Paddle, because we got so much visibility into what's going on. Tim, do you want to quickly introduce the concept of the data warehouse?
Yeah.
And I'll share some examples later on.
Yeah. I think the key here is that Hull has tracked your customer journey from the minute he stepped on your site and you didn't know anything about him, all the way up, through your personalized email, all the way up until the time that, he converted as a deal, and actually even past that sometimes, even when you're supporting him. So we have all of this data, but we tend to focus on activating the data and doing stuff with that in real time. So if you're trying to do analysis across the entire customer journey, what we tend to recommend is kind of piping all of that data into one of your data warehouses, and then you're able to go through everything that's happening, from everything that they're doing, everything that the way that your salespeople are interacting with them. This is also a really good way to gauge, which of your SDRs, when they're personalizing these sequences, in maybe they're getting good reply rates, but maybe they're not getting good close rates. I think all of those things, we have all of that data, and now that you can put it into a warehouse, there's all kinds of an additional analysis and BI that you can put on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. And just to give you a couple examples of the analysis that we run of this data. So obviously, we always looking at the opportunity creation and opportunity win rates. And often we do that per sequence or per segment, just to understand whether the high response rates we're seeing later convert into actual revenue for us. We also look at the funnel metrics in additional segments. So for example, what we're trying to do, and this is kind of ongoing analysis that we're doing, is trying to identify whether there's any sub-segments within the segments that we already know about that are performing extremely well. So we can essentially go and double down on this specific sub-segment, because the idea is to go after the highest reward, right? And the other kind of analysis that we often run is trying to determine what different sequence of touch points are performing best. And this is essentially trying to determine how our customer journey looks like. And it's very often beyond just sales. And this is, again, where we utilizing Whole really heavily. And this is what Tim was talking about before, where we can connect not only how they interact with our email in outreach, whether they click on links, but also be able to see how they interact with our website, what content they're interacting with, later down the line, how they're interacting with our product. So we can kind of understand our entire customer journey end to end and start thinking how we can design it better for the new prospects coming down our pipeline, so we can achieve those higher conversion rates and so on. Cool. I think I'll summarize this one. So as mentioned, to quickly iterate on your messaging and sequences, use response rates or meetings booked rates as your leading indicator. However, be extremely conscious that they don't paint a full picture, and therefore you need to also track your bottom of the funnel conversion rates. We had a situation at Paddle where we were getting extremely good response rate, like over 50%, but they weren't converting down the line. And we figured out that we're basically unconsciously talking about misdirecting our customers of what Paddle actually is doing, completely not realizing that. And that kind of came up later down the line, but obviously everyone was happy that they were getting 50% response rates. So that could have gone on for a long time. And, having all this data from all the different systems will also allow you to further refine your audiences and segments and better understand your customer journey. So you can start designing for how your new prospects interact with you and how you interact with them.
Yeah, cool. Maybe I could do a bit of a high-level summary in terms of what we talked about. So it all kind of started with kind of gathering the data and mapping the market of contacts and accounts you can actually sell to. But you want to make sure that you're selling to those who actually have a need for your product. And in order to do that, you think about things like enrichment. And when you're enriching accounts with additional data points, you're doing it for two reasons, and keep these in mind all the time: either to prioritize them more effectively or to allow you to deliver hyper-relevant messaging to them. Once you've got to that stage, you need to work out how you're going to use this data, how you're going to kind of activate it, I guess. And we use outreach to do things like our outbound email sequences. And you need to Brooke run us through a bunch of different types that you can think about there. And you need to pick a sequence that works for you and for your customers. Do think about what they're going to respond to, given that's the behavior you're trying to drive. But the key thing, which is going to really drive the high engagement rates with whatever it is that you're sending out, in our view, it is the message and that hyper relevancy. If you're able to use the data that you've gathered to predict a change that's happening within that company or a need for your product, that's what's going to drive your really high response rates. And we looked at an example whereby there was a customer getting a ton of traffic outside of their home country, and they didn't support a bunch of currencies, which helped them convert that traffic as effectively as possible. So that's what our message was around. Last but not least, we talked about how you measure and iterate upon your results. We talked about how whatever it is you choose to send out, if we're thinking about email sequences here, you need to even get to significance statistically to be able to analyze them in the first place. So driving that adoption is really key and what you're going to rely on your sales managers for. And actually how that reporting gets a lot more sophisticated over time. Like, we should be super cognizant of the fact that response rates are a leading indicator and don't necessarily translate to revenue later down the line. So you need to track these accounts that respond to your emails or whatever touch point it is that you're doing, and see how they behave later down the funnel, just to make sure you're kind of not lying to yourselves about what future performance is going to look like. And then last but not least, we've really talked about how this commercial data can help deliver really high response rates in email through good prioritization and hyper relevancy today and picking the right sequences. But again, to my initial point, once you have this set of commercial data, it can be used in a ton of different ways. Once you've got all of the accounts that is you should be selling to, all the contacts mapped out, and a bunch of data on them, so you even know how they might use your product to be able to predict they have a need for it. This can not only inform things like email messaging, but also ABM campaigns and more, which we could spend hours on as separate topics. But hopefully that was useful. And I know that, like, Alex and Brooke are more than happy to spend a bunch of time with anyone who's interested on how to apply some of these concepts to their own business.
All right. I think we are actually out of time. So if we did not get to your question, I'm going to be going through those. I will send them off to our speakers, and they'll get back in touch with you directly. So with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you for bearing with me with my internet issues. Of course, that would happen. And really appreciate our speakers for sharing their time and expertise with everyone. As you can tell, there really was no magic wand or magic hack that got results like these. It really was, the culmination of a good data strategy, diligent execution, and just a curiosity and willingness to try things and experiment. So we hope you not only learn something, but feel really excited and jazzed about, getting this going for your company too. So we will be sharing the recording and the slides via email shortly. So if you have any final questions or want to get in touch, you can do so then. With that, I think that's all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.